Serie Noire. This was a viewer suggestion that I dove into with absolutely no context, with no research, with blind faith, and it turned out okay. This is a good movie. I do take recommendations, sort of. Leave some down below. I might watch them eventually. I have seen another movie from Alain Corneau, of course, called All the Mornings in the World, which is great and not much like this movie at all. I'd heard of Patrick Devers, the French actor of the 70s. He died too young. Of course, I'd heard of Mary Trintignant's father. Actually, Alain Corneau would later become Mary's father by marrying her mother. I think that's how this works. Anyway, Mary plays a young prostitute. In the movie, she appears nude at 16. This is a European film that I mentioned. It is set in the least glamorous part of Paris imaginable. The title, Serie Noire, roughly means lemony snicket, a series of unfortunate events. I'm glad that I looked that up before getting too far into the movie, because this could influence how you experience the film. It provides some sort of dramatic irony. Things are going to go wrong. Is it going to be a bit cruel? It's also a nod to a hard-boiled crime genre that the movie is either stepping into or playing off of. This is quite an ironic movie. Surprised me a little bit. It is much more ironic than most realist films. Now, this is a movie about a guy, Franck. Is he a normal guy? Is he a crazy guy? We'll talk about that. He is sort of a scoundrel. He's a door-to-door salesman whose life spirals out of control after a series of inevitable, but also completely preventable twists and turns. Mary Trintignant's character, Mona, is kind of at the center of this. Everything starts when he meets her. Serie Noire is adapted, believe it or not, it's adapted from an American novel called Hell of a Woman, written by Jim Thompson. Jim Thompson, that doesn't sound like a French name. Yeah, he's American. He's mainly known for writing Pulp Fiction, not the movie, but Pulp Fiction, the thing. What type of film is this? That's actually a tough question. Some people describe it as a noir, perhaps because the title sounds an awful lot like that. I wouldn't call it a noir film exactly. It doesn't really matter what you call it. Who cares? But there are a few different things happening here. And the tone is interesting, unique, I would say. Primarily, this is a bleak movie. I think some people see it as almost unbearable tragedy. It's not exactly a neorealist tragedy. It's very gritty in some ways, but there's also something a little bit theatrical. Look at the first shot and the last shot of the film. That's not neorealism. Well, I don't know. There's also something personal about it, something intimate about it. Neorealist films and noir films often both feel kind of aloof, not always. But a big part of this movie is seeing how Franck pokes out at the world, seeing his action and reaction. It is an all-time great performance from Devers that hinges so much on the flickers of his face. It is a virtuosic performance. I mean, you might as well watch the movie for that, if nothing else. We'll talk more about this. First, though, I have to admit that I found Serie Noire moving, but I also found it to be amusing. One of the darkest comedies you'll ever find. I'm not sure everyone would agree. A lot of dark comedies lavish in the contrast. Basically, they try to shock you, right? Wow, can you believe we're telling a joke at a funeral? Oh my goodness. That's not really what this movie is doing. But it is very interesting how it teeters between total bleakness, real personal trauma. Trauma is a big part of the movie. And also comedy. I mean, I don't know. Did you find it funny? At the very least, it's unpredictable. Even though the title basically tells you what's going to happen, I was continuously surprised. Maybe not huge twists, but shifts. And there are a few scenes that are really from left field. Let me give you one example of just a nice moment. There's a little moment where Franck is being confronted by some of his choices. That would describe most of the movie, but here he locks himself in the bathroom for sort of a breather to try to escape for a moment. He smokes a cigarette, and then he starts cleaning the bathroom. A beautiful little twist. And yes, a moment of desperation. But also, I mean, that's kind of funny, isn't it, right? The only time a man will clean the bathroom. I don't know. I should say, I guess, that at first, this movie might seem to be about nothing. It might seem a little boring or irrelevant. You might wonder why we care about this guy. But things are very taut by the end, and you get so much inside of Franck's head. I think it's compelling. It's tough to describe Serie Noire, and I suspect that the movie might feel different to different people. I think both of those things are actually good. There's something delightfully kind of ambiguous about this film. Even though it's so gritty, it also has this ambiguous flourish to it, which is interesting. Anyway, a lot of this movie hinges on Franck, who is one of the most interesting characters you will find anywhere. And again, there are a lot of things going on here. We're introduced to this guy after he's parked his car in a muddy lot. The muddy lot is a staple of this neighborhood on the outskirts of Paris. You might actually wonder, what does the muddy lot represent for him? Why is it enticing? I don't know. The muddy lot. Maybe we'll come back to that. We get the opening credits as Franck first seems to like combat some imagined soldiers. He's swatting around and doing a finger guns or something. But then he starts dancing with himself along with the car radio. The radio is another motif in the movie. We'll talk about that maybe later. This opening might lead you to think that Franck has a screw loose. Certainly there's a few loose screws in his car, at least, but perhaps up here too. I don't think that's quite right. I personally saw Franck as more or less a normal guy. Of course, he does a lot of things that normal people wouldn't do, but sane people in movies do that kind of thing all the time. I don't think Franck talking to himself or singing to himself occasionally makes him crazy. And maybe they overdid this beginning. Maybe it tilts the scales a little bit too much for him being sort of a wacko, when actually I think he's kind of deeply normal in some sense. I don't know. Maybe you would see that completely differently, but here's how I would describe Franck. First, frustrated. Is there some political comment in here? Maybe. He's also naive. It's interesting how those two things go together so often. Naivete and frustration are siblings of a sort. Franck is also performative in a way, and I'm not talking about the singing here. It's more all of his lines. He's a door-to-door salesman, and he has all kinds of pitches, but he's kind of pitching with everything he does. He's pitching to himself to some extent. To me, one of the most interesting things about this movie is seeing Franck kind of throw something out there and then watching him react to how it goes. You get the feeling that he sort of doesn't know what any of these buttons do, but he's just randomly pressing them and seeing what sticks, seeing what happens. Sometimes he says something that he comes on a little strong and he says something that hurts someone. And then you can see him a little taken aback. But then you can see him, oh, no, don't look taken aback. But then you can really see what's happening in here in this movie. Sometimes he makes a pitch that someone actually goes for, and he's sort of surprised. Whoa, that actually worked. He realizes maybe after the pitch comes through that actually this isn't what he wanted. I can't name another movie that shows the human feedback loop in the same way. A lot of this, like I said, just hinges on this performance from Devere, which is amazing, really. It's cool. I will say, Franck does remind me a little bit, brace yourselves, Franck does remind me a little bit of Niles from Frasier, partly because of the cleft chin. He actually does look a little bit like David Hyde Pierce. But there's also a similar kind of, like, oh, yeah, let me say something. Oh, wait, that wasn't quite what I wanted to say. Like this little bit of a similar type of humor in some sense. There's something a bit cartoony about Franck, to be sure, but also really piercing. And man, that's interesting. In some ways, it feels like Franck is always kind of BSing, like he has all these stories and moves just to try to avoid touching the muddy ground. Maybe I'm being too charitable, I don't know. I think a lot of these lines and pitches have something to do with masculinity. Franck trying to be a tough guy, Franck trying to be a character from a film noir. And I guess that's one reason why I don't really see this as a film noir or a pulp film. Sometimes there's self-awareness in those movies, but here, I think you can see daylight between Franck acting like a tough guy and what he really is, which is kind of childish, like most people. If you want a scene that separates these things even more, Franck's run-in with the Hells Angels is a very interesting play on what you might find in a pulp film, but it goes completely the other way. French films, the New Wave, and some of the movies right before the New Wave, on the cusp of the New Wave, a lot of these movies play with ideas of American masculinity. A lot of them were so heavily influenced by classic films from Hollywood. The Cahiers was so fascinated by so many classic films that so much of the New Wave is kind of playing off this stuff. And maybe this is doing something similar, although I wouldn't call this exactly a New Wave film. But anyway, we mentioned masculinity. What about femininity? I think the thing I found most striking here, I'm not going to talk about all of the three women in the movie. You could. There's juice in all of them, I think. But what struck me the most is how Franck's wife occasionally dons like a domestic persona. And it's pretty conspicuous when she's sort of acting like a housewife. What's up with this? I mean, I'm not totally in touch with what it's alluding to, but it seems like she's playing a role just like Franck, and yeah, I'm not totally in touch with this like sort of post-war traditional domestic thing in France, but you get some taste of it here. Anyway, the last thing I'll say about Franck is that at first I thought we might be dealing with the old null protagonist, like a character who just is things kind of just happen to him, but he's a witness to the world and to the events of the film, but he doesn't have that much of a motivation of his own or a personality of his own. And there is some risk of this. But like I said, as things go on, you do become invested in the character, mainly just because you're so close to his face, I suppose. You really do get a sense of his stops and starts and what he is thinking about and what he's caught between. Now, many of these things are kind of high level, like, whoops, I said the wrong thing. Let me try to say something else. But there is also a deeper sense of his soul in it, too. Some of his missteps are amusing, but there's also really visceral moments in this film, of course. Painful moments in this film. I mean, do you want to know what it's actually like to commit a serious crime? This movie will give you a good idea. Not that I can compare it to the real thing exactly, but this is true crime. This is true crime, not those crappy podcasts. This is what it would really be like. Okay, let's talk about some bigger ideas. I mentioned frustration. I'm not going to read this too politically, but a little bit politically, right? It's a telling reversal, first of all, to show Paris in this gloomy light. Wait a second. There are no poor people in Europe, are there? Well, there are fringes. There's blight. There aren't really family structures in this movie, interestingly, or community or society. Maybe there's the weakest version of these things. A girl growing up with her aunt in this old sort of semi-abandoned house. A door-to-door salesman with seemingly no clients, with seemingly no coworkers. The boss is the only other person at the company, and their relationship is a little bit fraught. At home, Franck's connection with his wife is, well, I mean, is it even his wife? Are they even married? I'm not exactly sure. I think so. But society here is really scooped out and empty. There isn't anyone on the road. We do see a few people, but this sense of emptiness and a total reversal of high society or whatever is kind of the obvious backdrop of the film. Now, there are also some interesting hints of foreignness. There's the black boxers at the gym. There's Tiki Days, a somewhat oafish character, but perhaps he actually has more of a heart and more of a mind, maybe even than Franck. Tiki Days is Greek, a foreigner. Interestingly, Franck is proud of his heritage. He invokes his full name several times, as some sort of aristocrat might do. Doesn't really yield the same response as a king, though. This movie is also sort of a story of a younger generation. We have Franck and Mona pitted against Mona's aunt and Franck's boss. You also wondered to what extent De Vere was known as someone who represented a younger generation across his films. Anyway, I don't think Franck's frustration is simply a personality trait. There's something about the conditions, surely. I mentioned the radio earlier. There's a lot of radios in this movie. There's no other music, so it might be partly a practical idea to bring sound into the movie, but also maybe a little bit of French theatricality, a flourish. In some ways, Franck uses the radio like he uses a cigarette or a bottle of whiskey. I could construct some point about technology, maybe some of the English lyrics that come through the wire on these songs, but neither of these things actually ring true to me exactly. Franck's car is also a big part of the movie. Again, I don't have that much to say about it. Yes, of course, there's plenty of New Wave films that have cars and radio and stuff in that. Compare this to Breathless if you want to. I'm not going to. I've already laid out what struck me most about the movie, honestly. It's the intimacy that we get from Franck, even as he does all kinds of things, even as he seemingly leaves behind any sort of connection with the audience. You're still right there. You are still close to his soul, in a way. Does he have one? Seems to. For various reasons, this movie is kind of ambiguous. I don't know exactly what people will make of it, or what people will make of Franck. I really like the movie, if that's not obvious already. Okay, there's a couple of things I might adjust. Mona's character is a little blank. I don't think Mary Trintignant is actually that good in the film. It's a bleak one. Let's face it, even if you chuckle now and then, it's not for everyday viewing, I think. But it's definitely for viewing at some point. I'm glad to have cross Serie Noire off the list. I want to see a few more Patrick Devers movies. He is, I mean, pretty amazing in this film, a role that in some ways was maybe close to his own soul or something like that. Or there's a lot of him here or something. I mean, yeah, it's pretty amazing at the very least. Anyway, if you have any other movies to suggest, I'm open to any ideas. At the moment, I'm desperate. Not really. I got a huge watch list, but this was a lovely detour from that.